I'm delighted you're here. And if any of you are not friends, you're all friends, but if you're not official friends, there's literature outside for you to sign up. And the Friends is a great organization at the college that supports programs like this. So I encourage you to join if you aren't already. And now I'd like to introduce our special guests. Authors of the official national, let me make sure I get it all right, official book of the National September 11 Memorial, Allison Blais and Lynn Rasic. Allison Blais is Chief of Staff of the National September 11 Memorial and Museum and previously worked at the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, the agency that oversaw the memorial design competition. She graduated from Cornell University and earned a master's degree from Columbia University. Lynn Rasic is a graduate of Brown University. She is a Senior Vice President for Public Affairs and Communications of the National September 11 Memorial and Museum. She was Deputy Press Secretary to Mayor Rudolph Giuliani on September 11, 2001. To quote from Mayor Bloomberg's introduction to their book, "Since the attack, millions of people from every corner of the globe have visited the World Trade Center site to pay their respects to those we lost. Now they arrive to experience a memorial as beautiful and inspiring as any that was ever built, which is a testament not only to the creativity of Michael Arad's and Peter Walker's design, but also to the hard work of the memorial staff. Indeed, Allison and Lynn's hard work has produced a remarkable book. It's a moving testament to the enormous loss suffered and sacrifices made that day, and it is a tribute to our country's resiliency and an inspiration for future generations. I know from visiting the memorial, their book comes as close as anything can to the firsthand experience. It also enriches and informs your visit. And I encourage all of you, if you haven't, to go down to Lower Manhattan and see the site. It is really remarkable. And it honors a significant moment in our history, indeed an event that changed our world forever. And now, please join me in welcoming our authors.
Good evening. I'm Allison Blais. So happy to be here tonight, and thank you all for braving the weather to come out. I'm here with Lynn Rasic, and it's so exciting for us to be here. It's the first time that we've been able to talk about the book since the memorial opened, which is a different thing for us. And it was such a tremendous privilege to write this book. It was really a genuine labor of love for both of us. We tried to provide throughout a sense of the towers before 9/11, of course, the events of the day and the aftermath, and then go through the journey of the past 10 years of deciding what to rebuild and how. It was important to us to convey the magnitude, not just of the project itself, but of the process behind it. And that included not just the inspirations and the successes, but also the wide-ranging opinions, the debates, and the setbacks, and the vast array of people who are all so intimately connected to each decision made, large and small. All of that contributed to the final product of something that will now endure for generations to come. So some of you I know may have already read the book, and Lynn and I thought we would share some of the stories that made writing it the most personal to us, and a few of the details that did not make it to print. Since the book was published last summer, before the dedication of the memorial on the 10th anniversary, this is also a welcome chance for us to show you some of the amazing recent photos and look back on what a place of remembrance means now that more than 1 million people have already visited the memorial. And I can't tell you how much that number means to us to hear that over 1 million people have come already. And those are all people who were not able to set foot on the World Trade Center site for 10 years, who've now come to the sacred site and taken part in our core mission to remember the nearly 3,000 victims of the attacks. And in honoring them, anyone who visits can't help but recognize that the names that they're seeing are the everyday mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, and husbands and wives who make up the fabric of this country, who did on that day what so many of us do every day. They just got up in the morning and went to work. More than 400 of them were first responders who died performing their sworn duties, rushing into rather than out of harm's way. They came from over 90 different countries. The oldest was 85 years old, and the youngest was only 2.5. All of their stories are important, and only a subset fit within the pages of this book. But through the museum that we're now creating, we're striving to meet the second part of our mission, which is to educate the millions of people who visit each year, not just by telling the story of what happened on 9/11, but by recognizing that the events of that day are part of an ongoing story, one that, as events like the 9/11 health bill and Osama bin Laden's death show us, has not yet ended. Before we get to the present day, though, I want to step back to how we got to the mission that we're now working to achieve. In the aftermath of the attacks, the instinct to memorialize was, of course, spontaneous worldwide. Children from around the world sent cards and drawings to recovery workers. Within a day, Union Square was lined with candles, photographs, letters, poems, and drawings. So many channeled their emotions and reactions into creating something, whether they were professional artists or families around the kitchen table, just struggling to make sense of what had happened. Up top here, you see Betty Nielsen, who decided to organize her community in Fonda, Iowa, to create quilts for the families who lost loved ones. On the bottom is a banner that's now in our museum collection, created and sent to New York by students from Charleston, South Carolina. And on the top right is a familiar image of a stunning memorial that's now become an icon of how our nation remembers 9/11, the tribute in light that still graces the New York skyline every anniversary of the attacks. Memorial scholar Ed Linenthal has said that the act of memorializing victims is a protest, a way of saying we will not let these dead become faceless and forgotten. The sketch you see here was someone else's artistic response, someone else's way of remembering. This is memorial architect Michael Arad's first imagining of how we could remember those who were killed. He made this sketch before any plans for the World Trade Center had ever been announced. The twin voids representing the towers that you see here remain in the design we've realized today, but in this initial sketch, they were actually envisioned as cut into the Hudson River. Michael created a model of what this might look like on the roof of his apartment building. This idea, while beautiful, was ultimately impractical to realize, but it served as the basis of Michael's submission to the formal design competition in 2004. Michael's design, entitled Reflecting Absence, was selected from more than 5,000 submissions received from 63 different countries. It was the largest design competition in history. All but the final rounds of the international competition were judged blind by a jury that included a widow of a 9/11 victim, prominent architects, artists, and other cultural leaders, including Lynn, who was, of course, the winner of a similar competition in 1981 for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Michael was at the time a 34-year-old unknown architect working for the New York City Housing Authority. His design struck a chord with the jury from the start, but they noted that it felt too cold and needed something to soften and warm it, something that would bring new life back to the site. Arad was paired with landscape architect Peter Walker, and when they were awarded the winning entry, the two set to work on the mammoth task of coordinating their vision with the other projects at the World Trade Center, which Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who serves as the chairman of our board, has called the most complex and concentrated construction project ever undertaken. Through the design and construction process, several changes were made to Michael's original submission. Some were the results of prolonged public debates. Others were simply to ensure the project was viable enough to actually be realized. One of the changes that was a mixture of both was the decision to move the names of those killed to the top of the waterfalls. Here you see an image from Michael's original proposal, which situated the names below plaza level in front of a veil of falling water. Once that decision had been made, focus turned to the way the names would be inscribed, the order, the aesthetics, the location. And these were understandably some of the most sensitive and emotional decisions of the design process. Here you see the names as part of the finished memorial. There are 2,983 of them, and they are now directly at your fingertips as you stand in front of the largest man-made waterfalls in North America. When members of the competition jury visited the memorial just a few months before it opened, many of them remarked what a fitting change it was to have the names lining the perimeter of the footprints at the top of the falls. In the statement that they had put out on selecting the memorial, they had written, "In its powerful yet simple articulation of the footprints of the Twin Towers, reflecting absence has made the voids left by destruction the primary symbols of our loss. It seemed appropriate then that the visitors' personal connections to the individuals would happen at the same time they confronted the enormity of the voids." Once the decision had been made to list the names around the top of the waterfalls, Michael and his team explored dozens of options for how they would be displayed. Here you see just a couple of them that we evaluated at a mock-up that we created out at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. On the left, the letters came up through the surface of a reflecting pool. And on the right, water actually trickled over the panels, which some who viewed the mock-up noted gave a sense of tears falling over the names in perpetuity. In the end, the names were inscribed through bronze, each letter an absence, in a way that allows light to shine up through them at night. One of the things we heard over and over during the process to finalize the design was that people wanted a chance to create impressions or rubbings of the names, a tradition at the Vietnam Memorial and others around the world. This method of inscribing the names allows that, and it's one of the most heartwarming things you see now when families and friends take out charcoal or crayons so that they can bring their piece of the memorial home with them. The incised names also allow for what the memorial designer calls happy accidents, things he hadn't anticipated when creating the blueprints. Many who visit the memorial leave tributes that then become part of our museum collection. When families came on the anniversary for the first time, they placed flowers, flags, and personal items within the names themselves, and that has continued every day since. The final decision to be made on the names was perhaps the most fraught with emotion, and that was determining the way they would be positioned with respect to one another. The arrangement of names on this memorial makes it unique from any other memorial in existence. They are not alphabetical or arranged by any other usual method of organization. Instead, they are arranged by layers of what the architect calls meaningful adjacencies. All of the names have a place that reflects something about the lives of the people they represent, where they were that day, who they worked with, who they knew and loved, or who they were with during their final moments. One of the most profoundly moving parts of writing the book was being able to share some of the stories that are behind the names arrangement. In order to make it possible, we reached out to the next of kin of every victim, worked with the companies who had lost employees, talked to first responder agencies, and got information about their units. It took 2 years to finish that outreach to the nearly 3,000 families, to solicit their feedback and suggestions, and to compile it all to create the arrangement that's inscribed in bronze today. The stories behind the placement of the names are something that make this memorial so unique and moving to all who visit, whether you know someone who perished or not. And to give you a sense of the arrangement, I thought I would share a short excerpt from the book. This is from chapter 7. In the aftermath of 9/11, people across the country and around the world began reading the names of the victims aloud at vigils. An hours-long, solemn and respectful intonation with many meanings: a prayer, a thank you for the lives shared, a tribute to their heroic acts, a struggle to comprehend how this list could ever have come to be. Inscribed into the memorial parapets, the 5 rows of names stretch for more than 1,500 feet, almost a third of a mile, an expanse perhaps best described by former Mayor Giuliani, who on 9/11 called the sheer number of losses more than any of us can bear. One company, the international brokerage firm Cantor Fitzgerald, experienced a loss so severe that its employees make up nearly 1/4 of the names on the entire memorial. The firm operated out of the 101st to 105th floors of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Flight 11 hit the building at the 93rd floor at 8:46 a.m. on the morning of 9/11. Everyone who was in the Cantor offices by that time was killed. 658 employees out of the roughly 1,000 who worked in New York. along with 46 contractors, food service workers, and visitors. Of the husbands who were killed, 38 of them left behind pregnant wives. There were wedding plans in the making for 46 others. When the Cantor lives were taken, 955 sons and daughters lost a father or a mother. On a list of families that sustained multiple losses on 9/11, by far the affiliation most often repeated is Cantor, owing partly to the family-oriented nature of the firm's culture. And to break from the book text for just a second, this image is from a memorial guide application that we created and we launched last year. This is the location of Mark Joseph Calayo's name. Mark lived in Tribeca with his wife and with his 2 children. He was a senior managing director at Cantor Fitzgerald, where he had recruited his brother Stephen to join him as a broker. He also helped his brother-in-law, Tom Petticini, find a job at Cantor. And you can see the names of the 3 men are inscribed together here in the bronze among the expanse of their fellow Cantor employees. Howard Lutnick, the chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald, said in an oral history with the memorial, "We had a rule at the firm that we should hire our friends, that life is too short. We wanted to work with people we liked. And that rule applied not only to me, where I hired my best friend and my brother, but it also applied to the guys who were the security guards, who worked with their brother and their brother-in-law. And we lost them all that day. Unthinkable." Around both memorial pools, the order of the names from where major geographic groupings are located to which company would follow the one before it was all driven by the personal adjacency requests from victims' families. The first responders section of the memorial, for example, is linked intimately to the beginning of the World Trade Center section on the South Memorial Pool through a request from a loved one. Donald James McIntyre, a Port Authority police officer for 15 years, had been on duty on February 26, 1993, the first bombing at the World Trade Center. He helped escort workers to safety, and on 9/11, he and his wife's cousin, John Anthony Sherry, were both there. John was a trader at Eurobrokers in the South Tower. When Donald called his wife that morning, the last thing she heard was that he was rushing to the 84th floor where John's offices were located. For their names to be next to one another, the 61 Eurobrokers names in the World Trade Center section immediately follow the first responders section, which ends with the 37 Port Authority police officers. Some of the most heart-rending stories of families experiencing multiple losses come from the 4 flights. On Flight 175 was a family of 3, Daniel Raymond Brandhorst and Ronald L. Gamboa, who were traveling with their son David, only 3 years old. Because their last names were different, the 3 are among the many examples of families whose names would have been separated under a conventional alphabetical arrangement. As the buildings rise around the memorial, the 2,983 names are there in quiet witness. Cut through bronze, they represent thousands of memories made permanent, absences filled with light in times of darkness. Those few examples that I just read, many more of which are in the book, stand for hundreds of deeply personal stories behind the memorial. While they're heartbreaking to hear, to me they also represent the ultimate reminder that it's the connections in our lives that matter the most. As staff of the memorial, we've had the privilege of coming to know so many families who lost loved ones in the attacks. They've graciously let us into their lives, allowing us to come to know in some way those who perished. The meaningful adjacencies concept was also behind one of the most moving things I witnessed on the anniversary itself this year. No matter where you looked, you saw people coming together. They might have been families reuniting, standing next to 2 cousins they had lost, or they might have been strangers who had never met before, but who knew their son's name was next to his best friend's, or the one who shared the cubicle next to him at work. And they paused to introduce themselves and embrace when they saw someone come up to trace the name next to their loved ones. In the aftermath of the attacks, We felt the bonds that unite us as New Yorkers, as Americans, as part of humanity strengthened. And we should take just comfort in knowing that when circumstances require, we will come together and take care of one another with limitless compassion. That's the positive legacy of 9/11, and it's at the core of everything we do at the Memorial and Museum. Thank you so much for inviting us tonight, and it's my pleasure to introduce my co-author and friend, Lynn Rasic, and once Lynn speaks, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Ellen, for hosting us this evening. I've been honored and privileged to work on rebuilding the World Trade Center in one way or another for much of the past 10 years, first as Deputy Press Secretary to Mayor Giuliani, later working for Governor Pataki. And in 2005, I joined the Memorial Foundation just a couple months after it started operations. As you know, this past September, we successfully opened the first part of the new World Trade Center, our nation's tribute to the nearly 3,000 men, women, and children taken from us too soon. More than 10,000 people who lost loved ones 10 years ago attended the anniversary ceremony, and I wanted to share with you a few images from that day. Like every year since September 11, 2001, the names of the victims were read aloud in a solemn and moving ceremony. The act of reading the names has served as a memorial in of itself, filling a void because the families had no permanent memorial. This year, as the names were read by family members, remembering their brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, people could physically touch their loved one's name inscribed in bronze and know that from that day forward, they will always have a place of remembrance. In writing the book, Allison and I hoped that we could provide a window into the journey that led to the creation of our nation's memorial, which is now visited by approximately 10,000 people each day. As you can imagine, the journey has been a complicated one. There was a public mandate to rebuild the World Trade Center right after the attacks and to rebuild it quickly. The project was emotionally and politically charged. How could it not be? This was the largest attack on American soil, and there were deep-seated emotions, opinions, and feelings about what should be built and how we should memorialize on 16 acres of space in one of the busiest cities in the world, and at the very site where thousands of lives were taken. Magnifying these complications were the engineering and construction challenges associated with building a half-dozen mega projects at the World Trade Center site. Within just a few city blocks, the World Trade Center master plan includes 5 major skyscrapers housing over 10 million square feet of office space, the 3rd largest transportation hub in New York City, preparation for a performing arts center, a new shopping venue, a vehicle screening center, 2 new city streets and pedestrian throughways, all in addition to the memorial and the museum. And to add even more challenges to the rebuilding, the World Trade Center has 2 train lines that run right through the site, the PATH train and the number 1 subway line, and service could not be disrupted by the rebuilding process. They serve 150,000 commuters each day, including me, and so it's been imperative that the rebuilding continue around that service. The memorial also shares infrastructure with other projects at the site, such as the chiller plant, which is capable of pumping Hudson River water at 30,000 gallons a minute to provide dehumidified air to the museum, the transportation hub, and other underground spaces. In some places, the memorial and other projects share structural steel and shear walls. As one Port Authority executive director described in the project, it's like a game of pickup sticks. The construction schedule for one project can't help but impact other projects. Today, all of the World Trade Center projects are very much under construction. Because the memorial is the first project to open, it is surrounded on all 4 sides by construction. When people visit the site, they get a front row view to the historic rebuilding happening around them, including the new One World Trade Center, which will be the tallest skyscraper in the country. Right now, steel framing is at the 92nd floor, and the building is expected to be topped out later this year. As we describe in A Place of Remembrance, the story behind the memorial is more than just a story about urban planning, politics, and construction. It's really about people and the impact that 9/11 had on people. Throughout the book, we included the voices and quotes from people who lived near the World Trade Center, families who lost loved ones, survivors who escaped from the towers, those who responded and risked their lives, others who helped in the aftermath, and those who've been committed to rebuilding and creating the memorial. Michael Arad's beautiful memorial embodies, when put most simply, 3 types of stories from 9/11: stories of loss, stories of response and survival, and stories of hope. At the heart of the story of 9/11 is the senseless loss of innocent people, people who were friends, colleagues, and families. The connections between those lives are embedded in the memorial's names arrangement, which Allison so eloquently described. One of the stories behind the arrangement is shared by 2 people I knew personally, Richard Ross and Stacy Sanders, who are, not pictured here. Sorry. Richard Ross and Stacy Sanders, who are pictured here. Richard's oldest daughter, Abby Ross Goodman, was my college roommate, and she remains one of my dearest friends. On September 11th, when I was working for Mayor Giuliani, there was very little time to think about much of anything that morning. We were trying to respond to a disaster of epic proportions, figure out where to relocate the mayor's office because City Hall had to be evacuated, and how to communicate to the public during a time of extraordinary uncertainty, fear, and grief. In the early afternoon on 9/11, I called my parents from the police academy where we had relocated to check in with them and let them know that I was okay. My father told me that my friends were trying to reach me because Abby's father was on one of the planes. My next call was to Abby, who was in Boston. To hear her voice filled with so much pain was just absolutely excruciating. I just wanted to reach through the phone to hug her. She told me that morning that her first concern when she heard about the World Trade Center being hit by a plane was for our friend Stacy, who was Abby's best friend from high school. Stacy had just started a new job that summer at Marsh & McLennan and was expecting to be engaged to her boyfriend in a few weeks. Stacy was at work that morning in the North Tower on the 96th floor in the very same building that Abby's dad's plane crashed into. Richard and Stacy's names are next to each other on the memorial, and the pain that I know that Abby's had to endure can never be ceased by any memorial. But when I told her that their names would be next to each other, permanently etched in bronze, she said it was both heartbreaking and beautiful to think of them together in that way. Abby's and Stacy's families are forever bonded by their shared loss, and when I took Abby and her family to see her father and Stacy's names on the anniversary, she said she found comfort in seeing their names together. And I hope if the memorial provides some families with some measure of comfort, then this memorial will have done some good. While the memorial is a tribute to those lost, it's also a testament to the capacity of the human spirit. In the minutes, days, and now years since 9/11, so many inspiring stories of response, survival, and resilience emerged. Some of the earliest were of the first responders rushing into the towers, as well as civilians helping colleagues, friends, and sometimes strangers to safety. These stories continued through the aftermath during the rescue operation at Ground Zero. As Hale Gerland, a volunteer rescue worker who we quote in the book, said in an interview 3 days after 9/11, "You want to find these people. It's an emergency. You want to see if you can find more alive people, so you don't really think about it. You don't think about the twisted metal and about your hands and that you're hurt because it could be you under there. I think it's humanity at its best, and before it was humanity at its worst. And just to stand there and to see what was once a building, especially in that smoke, it's a war, and it's never going to be the same." Hale was right. Our world changed, and I don't think anyone who lived through 9/11 feels quite the same. The memorial recognizes that we're forever changed by the loss of life and the loss of innocence, but it's also a statement of resilience. In the middle of the grove of oak trees at the memorial is a Callery pear tree, now known as the Survivor Tree. The tree had been planted at the World Trade Center on 9/11. It suffered through the devastation. Its bark was charred, and the tree was reduced to just stumps. However, members of the New York City Parks Department decided to salvage it from the rubble of Ground Zero. They brought it to Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx and nursed it back to health. The tree has since flourished, grown back its branches, and has lived up to its name time and again. It blossoms every spring. In March 2010, the tree was completely uprooted in a wind rainstorm, and then last summer, in a single week, it survived both an earthquake and Hurricane Irene. This scrappy pear tree reminds us that we can heal and that we can grow. And it's these types of stories that help give us hope when we need it most. With the memorial now open, I think we have a lot to be hopeful about. Just before the new year, we marked an important milestone at the memorial, welcoming our 1,000th visitor. To date, we've welcomed more than 1.1 million people. While construction continues on the other projects, we have to manage our visitation through a reservation system, and already 2.3 million passes have been reserved from people in all 50 states and more than 100 countries. It's a clear indication of the public's will to commemorate and to keep the promise that we all made to never forget. Every day, new stories and experiences related to 9/11 are being made at the memorial. The brother of FDNY Captain Patty Brown, who was killed on 9/11, told me that over the years he hadn't been sure what kind of memorial, or really if any memorial, could be a truly fitting tribute to his brother and the sacrifice that he made. He'd been worried that with a shiny new memorial at the World Trade Center that he wouldn't be able to feel the presence of his brother, as he did for so many months when he was down at Ground Zero during the recovery effort. But he said to me while standing near the South Pool where his brother's name is inscribed, he said, "I feel him here, and while I had no idea what kind of memorial I wanted, this memorial is exactly right." Again, it's a privilege for all of us who have worked on the memorial to be part of creating something lasting, comforting, and hopeful. And it has been an extraordinary privilege to get to know the stories of those whose names are on the memorial, as well as others who've been closely impacted by 9/11. There are countless other stories of survivors, first responders, recovery workers, family members, and those who helped to build the memorial and the museum. Unfortunately, we could only tell just a handful in this book. And while all these stories can't possibly be conveyed by the memorial, I like to think that it's the stories that are truly the foundation for the memorial, just as much as the steel, concrete, granite, and bronze that the memorial is built from. And fortunately, many of these stories will be preserved and told in the planned Memorial Museum. The pavilion is that glass structure that's pictured here. In building the memorial and planning for the museum, we have strived to do justice to the incredible stories of loss, resilience, and hope. In honoring the memory of those we lost, we hope the memorial shows that something beautiful and meaningful can emerge from tragedy. Thank you again for having us today, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
25 years from now, how do you think your experience would have changed?
Wow. I think it's probably the most meaningful thing I will ever do. I can't imagine anything else. You know, when we were there for the anniversary and we saw these families around the memorial, just the sense of, you know, after working on this for 7 years and Lynn for 10, really, it was just the most amazing sense of that you had given some kind of, it wasn't really closure, but that you had given some kind of hope to people. And that, I mean, I don't think I'll ever experience anything else like that.
Yeah, and you know, my hope too is that there never needs to be another memorial like this built. I always say that to, Abby when she said, "Oh, I'm so, so proud of you and so thankful to you." And I just say, I wish that we never had to build this memorial in the first place.